Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I hope you're drinking lots and lots of eggnog and eating mince pies and keeping yourself lovely and cosy and warm and wrapping up lots of presents because this is a very special time of year, and lots of love and goodwill to each and every one of you. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, Fletcher wiped away the snow that had gathered on the wooden steps of the deck with his heavily gloved hand. Then he sat down on the step to stare out at the glistening white wilderness that stretched out before him, like a vast, interminable ocean of white. All that was needed were a couple of white polar bears, he thought, gliding across the snow with their substantial white paws, to set off this riveting Arctic scene to its ultimate perfection. He marvelled at how magnificently beautiful everything was, now buried completely, swathed resplendently with carpets of thick, sumptuous, gleaming snow, that in the first light of the morning cast ethereal, soft shadows that danced across the snow in a flattering, twinkling luminescence. It was like staring at an enchanting, picturesque winter wonderland, as even the clusters of trees on the perimeter of the clearing that fringed the outer boundaries of the wood grove were generously weighted down, richly adorned in icy crystals that sparkled like bedazzling, opaque Christmas ornaments. Fletcher pulled out the Cuban cigar from the top pocket of his green plaid shirt that was buried beneath the heavy contours of his thick sheepskin anorak that he was wearing. He let out a huge sigh, unwrapping the cellophane packaging, pushing the cigar between his puckered lips, lighting its tip with his lighter. He sucked in the aromatic tobacco, breathing out long wisps of smoke that almost froze as they vaporized into the icy cold air. He let out a large puff. Fletcher felt his stiff arthritic body, that these days seemed so rigid and tense, like some of the inelastic, taut, statuesque trees in the wood grove that were held to ransom at the moment, under the heaving, unyielding weight of the inflexible snow that graced their protracted boughs, physically begin to relax, as the aromatic smoke did wonders to his constitution, in the way that nothing else ever could. For indeed he didn't know what he would do without his Cuban cigars. They helped to take the edge off his tension, loosen his tight muscles, enable him to physically decompress like a rigid beach ball, just letting go of the cumulative air that it contained. It was Christmas morning. Fletcher felt a doleful melancholia, as Christmas had always been the most special time of the year for him, but not this year. This year Christmas was going to be a lonely, isolated, somewhat miserable affair. In normal circumstances, Fletcher, accompanied by his beloved wife Phoebe, would be visiting their children in New York. His daughter Christine would lay out a fabulous, sumptuous spread for them all, with all the trimmings, the most succulent roast turkey you've ever tasted, that was so juicy and tender that the white meat would literally fall away from the bone, crisp roast golden potatoes, a velvety deep crimson cranberry sauce, chipolata sausages, bacon rolls, cauliflower cheese, Brussels sprouts anointed with a plethora of rich golden gravy, and let's not forget Christmas pudding, brandy butter, mince pies. Fletcher loved nothing more than being reunited with his family and staying at Christine's in her large, grandiose New York apartment that was so lavishly decorated with no expense spared. It looked like an ornate suite at the Waldorf Astoria, where his 2 daughters and 2 sons, along with their wives and children, would gather together for a huge festive celebration year after year. But not this year. Things were very different this year. Christmas embodied so much to Fletcher. In his opinion, it was 1,000 times more spectacular than Thanksgiving. Since he was a little boy, he'd loved everything about Christmas, all that it represented: a humble stable, a heavily pregnant young woman, the treasured birth of the Christ child. For him, beyond the religious significance of this precious day in our illustrious history, Christmas also meant for him the bright sparkling Christmas lights of the city, the throngs of people, the fabulous atmosphere of the shops when you went purchasing Christmas presents, the thrill of buying a live Christmas tree that anointed the apartment with thousands of needles, the ritual of decorating the tree, hanging up the Christmas cards on long ribbons across the wall, placing the presents under the tree, watching his excited grandchildren hanging their red Christmas stockings onto the mantel, leaving cookies and milk out for a hungry Father Christmas. He adored the Christmas carols, the church services, the delicious eggnog, the Christmas mince pies, the bright laughter of children as they tore open their Christmas presents with rapturous glee, the family getting together to enjoy quality time. Of course, there were some things he didn't like about Christmas, and that was reuniting with Christine's husband. But there were some things you could never avoid. He knew for many Americans, Christmas could be wrought with stress when you had to interact with family members you didn't particularly like, who served to ruffle your feathers, rubbing you up the wrong way. For him, the problem relative in his case was his highly annoying, patronising son-in-law Godfrey, whom he didn't believe was worthy of his daughter Christine's undivided attention and loyal love, as he had his fleeting suspicions that there was certainly another side to Godfrey, a dark side, but he chose not to meditate on those discomposing feelings. In truth, he found the pompous man with his inflated, overbearing ego that was so enormous it would quite literally make a beached whale appear inconspicuous. He was arrogant, conceited, pretentious, swollen-headed, with a haughty superiority, as his years at Harvard had somehow given him the false, hubristic impression that he was far better than anyone else. It would seem from the moment Fletcher had met Godfrey, he hadn't liked the conceited man one bit. But what could he do about it? It wasn't his business who his daughter chose to marry. Some parents might have been thrilled for their daughter to have a successful fancy pants as a husband like Godfrey, a mover and shaker in high society, so to speak. But Fletcher did not like the man's shallow, elitist, boastful attitude, as everything about his son-in-law was fake in his opinion. Fletcher sighed warily as he drew in another puff of his Cuban cigar, reflecting that even Godfrey's insufferable contemptuous presence on Christmas Day would be so much more welcome than the lonely, isolated Christmas that he and Phoebe would be embracing this year. Unfortunately, Phoebe had recently taken a nasty, rather unfortunate tumble when she'd fallen down an escalator at the shopping centre before Thanksgiving. Her neck was now firmly secured in a neck brace. She had been advised that any form of travel was out of the question, and the couple needed to stay at home for Christmas. Of course, Fletcher knew the specialist was absolutely right, as Phoebe was not capable of travelling over long distances. Besides, her injury brought on a great deal of pain. So this was a Christmas with just the two of them. He chastised himself for his self-pity. There were people out there who were celebrating Christmas all on their own this year, others who were forced to work on Christmas Day, like restaurant staff, emergency workers, doctors, firemen, so much more. He had to be grateful for small mercies, as small as they may be. At least he'd be spending the day with Phoebe, his beloved wife of over 50 years, whom he loved with all his heart. It wouldn't be so bad, he told himself, but try as he might, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was going to be the worst Christmas of his entire life, even though everything about this morning was indicative of a perfectly magnificent Christmas Day. But without the rest of the family, it was sorely lacking its usual vibrant finesse and beguiling magic. Fletcher turned around to glance briefly at the wooden cabin, where he and his wife Phoebe had resided for the last 10 years. He never regretted the day he had decided to buy the place. If anything, the cabin looked quaint and charming on this Christmas morning, its wooden roof richly swayed in thick layers of snow. "I'll do my best to make the day as pleasing as I can for my wife," he told himself. Phoebe was propped up on her pillows when he entered the bedroom. She glanced at her husband with sad, sorrowful eyes. "I'm so sorry, darling. I know how much it means to you to be spending Christmas with the family. I really feel I've let you down this year." "Don't be ridiculous, sweetheart," said Fletcher. "All I want for Christmas is you, and you and I are going to have a wonderful day. Besides, the good news is we'll be able to speak to the family on Skype, so it'll almost be as if they're here with us." "But I feel so bad," said Phoebe, her eyes filling with tears. "You're going to have to do all the cooking yourself. That's such a big ask for you. I so wish I could help." "It will be a challenge, but I'll do my damnedest to make a delicious roast turkey for the two of us. That reminds me, I better put it in the oven right now. It's one hell of a sizable bird. It's going to take several hours to cook." Fletcher went into the kitchen. He began prepping the potatoes, the Brussels sprouts, and the cauliflower cheese. He followed the instructions on a YouTube video, covering the turkey with streaky bacon, filling the cavity of the bird with a pork-based sage and onion stuffing. Then he placed the bird into the oven for the long roast. He looked out of the kitchen window to see a man's truck driving up to the cabin, rubber tires skimming and crunching the snow. Finally the truck reached a standstill, parking about 100 feet away from the cabin. He heard the sound of a car engine being switched off, doors being opened and slammed behind each other, as feet crunched snow under rubber soles. Then he heard those feet approaching the cabin, noting from his window that the two people were leaving two very conspicuous trails of footsteps in the snow, one pair very large, the other small. No one was more surprised to see two unlikely strangers in these parts than Fletcher himself. Who are they, he wondered, for he didn't recognize the people at all. The man looked to be in his late 30s. He was warmly dressed, holding the hand of what appeared to be a very cute 7-year-old girl, wearing a tartan dress and a warm red jacket. Her black hair was braided into 2 pigtails. They were both walking towards the cabin door, where the man proceeded to knock. Fletcher couldn't help noticing that the man looked deflated. He would recognize that look anywhere, as the man looked exactly how he felt, lonely and sad, as if Christmas offered him very little to be happy about. Fletcher went to the door and opened it. "I'm very sorry to bother you, on Christmas morning of all mornings," said the man. "I'm running low on petrol. I've barely got anything left in my tank. I know it's a big ask, but I wondered if you could take me to the gas station in your truck to pick up some more petrol." "Of course," said Fletcher. "I'd be glad to help. But why don't the two of you come inside for something hot? A cup of tea, coffee, a hot chocolate, some eggnog, perhaps? After all, it is Christmas, and the two of you look very cold." "That would be very kind," said the man. "My name is Wallace, and this is my daughter Francesca. Oh, by the way, Happy Christmas." Before long, Phoebe, Francesca, Wallace and Fletcher were sitting by a crackling fire in the living room, enjoying hot chocolates and warm mince pies, watching the flames of the fire crackle and spit. "This is very kind of you," said Wallace. "I'm enormously grateful. We've been driving around in circles, looking for this little place we're renting for the week. We don't know Montana very well. We're from Idaho." "Where are you going for Christmas?" Phoebe asked. "Nowhere exactly," said Wallace. "We've hired a little cottage for a week somewhere in these parts, but we've been getting hopelessly lost. I've completely drained the petrol tank." "I see. So what are you doing for Christmas lunch then?" she asked. "Nothing really," said Wallace. "Unfortunately, Francesca's mother died this time last year from breast cancer, so it isn't an easy time of the year for us. It's hard for us to celebrate Christmas in the circumstances, so we're just taking it very easy." "I am sorry," said Fletcher. "I can imagine what you must go through at this time of the year. We are very honoured if you would consider spending Christmas Day with us. I'm not the greatest cook in the world, but I'll give it my best shot. We're also not getting together with our family, as my wife's neck injury means that travelling in her state is pretty close to impossible. She can walk around and do easy things, but doing anything that puts strain on her neck is not advised. We normally spend Christmas in New York with family, you see." Francesca's face lit up like a Christmas tree. "Please, Daddy, please can we have Christmas lunch here with these really nice people? Please, Daddy, please." Her face almost seemed to beg her father. "I don't see why not," said Wallace, "if you're sure it's not too much trouble." "I tell you what, Francesca," said Phoebe. "You see that wooden chest over there? It's full of Christmas decorations. There's a white Christmas tree in there. Would you like to decorate it?" "Yes, please," said the little girl excitedly, bustling around in the trunk and pulling out all kinds of bright decorations and Christmas baubles and tinsel, her face positively glowing with enthusiasm. She looked like a girl who'd been denied Christmas and now had been given it all back. Before long, Wallace and Fletcher were busying themselves in the kitchen, drinking eggnog, talking and preparing the Christmas dinner. Fletcher found that he and Wallace had a lot in common. Both were keen hunters and fishermen. They loved camping and hiking, so they began to talk about all their adventures, and the warmth of the conversation was infectious as both men laughed, drank beers, and busied themselves chopping herbs and carrots, making bechamel sauce for the cauliflower, and allowing the cranberries and sugar to burst and bubble away to produce the most gloriously velvety, vibrant, shining crimson sauce. As luck would have it, it turned out that Wallace was an excellent, superb cook. He'd worked as a chef in a top hotel in Idaho for many years, so his presence in the kitchen meant the food being cooked was raised from a level F- to an A++. The delicious scents of roasted turkey, herbs, melted butter, parmesan, caramelized ham wafted over the cabin. Fletcher felt his mood elevate exponentially as the cabin began to smell exactly like Christmas. It smelt even more delicious than Christine's kitchen smelt at this time of the year. It was like a miracle had transpired. Phoebe had put on some Christmas music, which lifted the ambience of the cabin, as everyone began to sing along to the music. Francesca was in her element, decorating the Christmas tree that Fletcher had not intended to put up this year. But by the time Francesca had finished, the Christmas tree looked radiantly beautiful as the Christmas lights flickered on and off. The little girl's eyes began to fill with tears. "What's the matter, dear?" said Phoebe, holding the little girl's hands. "Why are you so sad? Don't you like the tree? I know it's not real, but—" "I'm not crying because I'm sad," said the little girl. "I'm crying because I'm so happy. I never thought I'd have a tree this Christmas. And all this nice food you're cooking. Daddy's been too sad to celebrate Christmas, so I thought we weren't going to have one this year. We were just going to stay at that cottage and eat baked beans on toast. We weren't going to have anything special this year. I'm crying because I'm so happy." Phoebe gathered the little girl in her arms, kissing her forehead affectionately. "And what about presents? Were you going to have any presents this year?" The girl shook her head. "No." Phoebe told the girl to get a bag at the bottom of her cupboard. It contained some of the Christmas presents she was going to send off to her grandchildren in the new year. Now she had in mind to give a couple to the little girl, as she could always buy replacements for her grandchildren, but in her mind it wasn't acceptable for a 7-year-old little girl not to have a present at Christmas. She handed the little girl a big box tied with a purple ribbon. "Now that's for you," she said. Francesca's face brightened, as if she was unable to believe she was actually getting a Christmas present. She tore it open vigorously, with a zealous exuberance, squealing with such a bounteous joy when she finally opened the box, to stare at the most exquisite porcelain doll she'd ever seen. The tears poured down her face like raindrops. "It's beautiful! Thank you so much!" She rushed into Phoebe's arms, giving her the biggest bear hug. Phoebe felt an incredible joyful surge gushing through her heart, a profound, overwhelming feeling, such as she had never felt before. As the consummate gratification she felt for making this girl so thrilled at Christmas brought her a reward that triumphed any Christmas present she'd ever brought her rather spoilt, overindulged grandchildren. For this girl was so incredibly appreciative. "Daddy, look! Look what Phoebe gave me! It's the prettiest doll in the whole world! I'm going to call her Grace." "That's a very nice name," said her father, looking directly at Phoebe and mouthing the words, "Thank you." Before lunch, Phoebe and Fletcher Skyped the family in New York. "Hello, Gramps," came his grandson's voice. "Look what Mummy and Dad gave me. It's a big truck. It's remote-controlled. It can drive anywhere I want it to go." "It's very nice," said Fletcher, chuckling. "How are you, Dad?" came his daughter Christine, looking into the camera at her father. Fletcher took the computer around the cabin, introducing his daughter to their two guests, the Christmas tree, the storm being cooked up in the kitchen. "I feel positively intimidated," came Christine's voice. "My Christmas spread ain't going to be a patch on that. You look like the chef from the Ritz has cooked your lunch today. You better not enjoy yourself too much, Dad, because if you do, you might never want to come up to New York again. But good on you, Dad. It sounds like you're having a whale of a time. I'm so happy for you." It was true. The Christmas that Fletcher thought was going to be a mundane, dull affair had been transformed into a grandiose occasion with lots of Christmas sparkle and cheer. The table had been beautifully laid with gleaming glassware, shining silver, starched napkins, candelabras filled with candles and flickering flames, along with crackers. The Christmas tree stood up proud and tall on the left-hand side of the mantel. The fire was crackling away happily in the hearth. It was fabulous having guests here on Christmas Day, giving other people a Christmas they weren't expecting to have this year, with the help of Wallace's expertise on the culinary stakes. The virtuoso first-class delicious meal that was served up, more than excelled their highest expectations. Wallace carved the turkey to perfection. The food melted in the mouth. It was so delicious. Everyone raised their crystal glasses, cheering to wish each other a happy Christmas, and then bright colourful crackers filled with jokes and token gifts were pulled and snapped enthusiastically, while Christmas hats were placed on heads, and mouths tucked into layers, textures and flavours that were very satisfying indeed. "I can't tell you how grateful I am to have been invited to spend Christmas with you and your wife," said Wallace, a single tear spilling down his cheek. "You have no idea what it means to us. This would have been a very lonely, sad Christmas for the both of us, without your kind intervention." "Likewise," said Fletcher. "I'm very glad you came." After Christmas lunch, it was decided that Phoebe and Francesca would watch a movie together, while Wallace and Fletcher would take a leisurely walk into the woodgrove to work off their overindulgences at lunch. This was the first time that Fletcher had been at home at this time of the year. The snow crunched beneath their feet as they walked through the tall statuesque trees of the woodgrove, disturbing a few deer that scattered the moment they saw the two men. "I really love the snow," Fletcher told Wallace. "Nothing in the world beats a white Christmas." "I agree," said Fletcher. "Christmas is meant to be white. You've made this Christmas so special for my daughter. In truth, I didn't want to celebrate Christmas this year, as it's the anniversary of my wife's death today. She died a year ago in a hospital bed, so it kind of felt wrong to be celebrating. But I can see by my daughter's elated expression today, how happy she looks, that celebrating Christmas is very important to her." "Of course it's important for your daughter," said Fletcher. "It's terribly important for every young child. I can assure you of one thing, Wallace. That is, your wife would definitely want you to celebrate Christmas today. The last thing your wife would want is for you to be grieving her loss, even if she did die on Christmas Day a year ago. I haven't truly expressed my commiserations to you for losing your wife. It can't be easy, being a single parent, having to raise your kid all on your own. It's not an enviable task by any manner of means." "You're right," said Wallace. "My wife wouldn't have wanted us to be miserable today. No one appreciated Christmas more than she did. She adored going shopping, putting up the Christmas decorations, drinking eggnog, having parties with friends. In truth, I think she would have been bitterly disappointed with me, not making a big deal out of the occasion, failing to buy my daughter a present. All of which were very wrong choices on my part. I can see that now. There you are, then. I hope I've made my point. In truth, I thought Christmas without the extended family this year was going to be a non-starter. But your serendipitous arrival today has blessed us all with a fabulous Christmas, and having you here has made the day very special indeed. I now know more than ever that Christmas is all about sharing and giving, which is why it's a time of great joy. Furthermore, I know of nothing that gives me greater pleasure than seeing the euphoric expressions on my grandchildren's faces when they open their presents. And having your daughter Francesca here today, opening that doll, seeing her elated expression on her face, brought me exactly the same gratification that I get every single year from my own grandchildren. Possibly more so, as Francesca wasn't expecting anything, so she was on cloud 9 to get a present. She was so happy, and I can't thank you enough for that doll, along with the jigsaw puzzle, chocolates and storybook that you gave her. You were incredibly generous. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your generosity." "It was nothing. It was a pleasure." As they trudged through the snow, the soft light of the day was beginning to fade. The snow sounded crisp and brittle under their feet. A cold, invigorating wind blew against their anoraks, but both men thoroughly enjoyed the bracing elements, the crisp freshness of the air, the smell of the forest. Everything felt remarkably quiet, when all of a sudden Wallace noticed a dead deer carcass lying splayed out over the branch of an oak tree, with one of its back legs torn off, both its eyes missing, so that it was staring at them blankly with wide open sockets, which did seem rather macabre. Also, weirder still, its head was facing the wrong way round. It appeared to be back to front, as if the manner of death had been a chokehold over the neck, and then a dislocation. To the surprise of both men, the deer was warm to the touch, as if it had only been recently killed. But what perturbed both men was that the carcass was hanging on the tree 5 feet off the ground, as most predators would eat the carcass from the earthen floor, and this was not Africa, where leopards were recognized for dragging their prey up onto a tree. Also, the way the eyes and legs had been removed were exceedingly bizarre. The manner of death nothing short of extraordinary, as no predators were known for dislocating the neck this way, although it was possible a bear could have done this, but bears were in hibernation at this time of the year. Fletcher knew he had never seen an animal killed like this before. He began to examine their immediate surroundings for whoever or whatever this carcass belonged to. Surely they wouldn't be far away from their food source. That was when both men discerned a trail of very large footprints. Fletcher looked up at Wallace with a bemused expression on his face. "You don't think it's a Bigfoot?" he asked. At that, Wallace's face broke out into a broad grin. "Don't be ridiculous. Those things aren't real, surely. And if they were, well, just supposing they were, wouldn't they have moved away to a warmer region, without the disadvantages of the snow, which would make finding food and keeping warm a continuous challenge for them, surely?" "Well, then explain the size of those footprints," said Fletcher, leaning down to examine the size of the feet. "They're easily over 18 inches long." Fletcher glanced at Wallace's expression, which paled. His face turned almost a ghostly white, almost as white as the snow. He looked nonplussed. "This is rather strange," he admitted. "These feet are way too big to be human. And look how the toe is splayed to the right at an odd angle. No one in their right mind would walk on the snow bare feet. And no human being has toes splayed out like this. No, these feet are far too big," he said, scratching his head. "I'm thinking—" "Yes," said Fletcher, his voice sounding animated. "You're thinking what?" "I'm thinking, what else can it be? It's got to be a Bigfoot." Both men looked at each other with wide, excited, incredulous eyes. Fletcher began to feel like a young boy all over again, as a thrilled sense of wonder coursed through his veins, like the waves of a choppy sea becoming more frenzied by an exuberance that could not be suppressed or contained. Indeed, so elated were the euphoric feelings that bounced inside him like a buoyant beach ball that he couldn't help himself from wobbling precariously like a blancmange jelly. But to the casual observer, he was possibly trembling from the cold. But nothing could be further from the truth. Fletcher's entire body was shaking from the sheer exhilaration of such an extraordinary discovery, as from this point in time he had never believed in Bigfoot before. He did know of a man in town, Carter, who claimed to have had a fleeting encounter with a Bigfoot 2 years ago. Carter had informed the entire bar about his strange, anomalous encounter with a Bigfoot, and much as Fletcher rarely wanted to believe his account, the trouble with Carter was he was a notorious spinner of yarns, whom couldn't be trusted, so anything that came from his mouth he took with a pinch of salt. Many of the townsfolk had doubted his encounter to be legitimate, but maybe for once in his life Carter wasn't fibbing but telling the truth. Carter was also only forthcoming about his story when he was in an inebriated state, or rather drunk, and although he was a great exaggerator and embellisher, nothing had changed over the years. Another likely sign that he wasn't lying about his Bigfoot story. He had explained that while he was washing the dishes in the sink at home, he'd seen this massive figure standing on top of his picnic table in the backyard, near the fire pit. He had said the creature was like this big towering mass of black hair that was gargantuan in every way, but the shape of the creature was distinctly humanoid. He said he had a dish in his hands, and as he leaned towards the kitchen window, the dish flew out of his hand, crashing on the linoleum floor. He said in that second the creature's head had swiveled around to look in his direction. Then it had glided over to the kitchen window, pressing his large face against the window pane, staring in at him with deep-set, dark brown, curious eyes. Carter was so terrified he screamed, running into the bedroom, returning moments later to discover that the Bigfoot had long since gone. He went outside the house to investigate and found a huge foot impression in the soil just outside the kitchen window. "You know what this means," said Fletcher, finally returning to the present. "It means there must be a Bigfoot around here." Both men began to study the landscape, and that was when they noticed spirals of smoke gliding up into the sky. They moved towards them. They were to discover that between two undulating hills covered with snow there was a dip in the valley, and a fire was crackling away in the snow. Both men carefully descended down the steep hillock, moving cautiously towards the fire, with the stealth of a wild cat. And that was when they realized that against the other hillock, blending so seamlessly into the environment, was a vast igloo-like structure, built half a foot away from the fire. The structure was made up of twigs, branches, bracken and moss, and layered with snow, which they perceived was clearly a nest. Fletcher put his fingers on his lips, tiptoeing surreptitiously towards the structure, then crawling on his hands and knees. As he moved ever forward, he shuffled past the fire, hoping that the sounds of the twigs crackling away with the bright yellow flames would not alert whatever was inside the igloo to his presence. As he got close to the structure, he looked inside the opening. He could hear the sound of a creature snoring very loudly, and see a dense, burly shape lying in the structure, covered in long, flowing, dark hair. The two men quickly crept away, certain that they had discovered a Bigfoot. "You know what I'm thinking," said Fleming. "It's Christmas. We have tons of leftovers. Why don't we plate the creature a huge plate of food, come back and put it next to the deer on the tree? I'm sure that must be his carcass that has recently been killed. I mean, who can resist your good cooking?" So that is what both the men did. They got a box, filling it with mince pies, grapes, oranges, bananas, apples, walnuts, cookies, sliced turkey, ham, roast potatoes, cranberry sauce, roasted ham, and bread rolls. "I just feel that the Bigfoot deserves to have a good Christmas like we have," said Fleming. "We all overindulged ourselves. Christmas is all about spreading the goodwill and the cheer." So they decided to place the box of goodies right next to the dead deer, as they didn't want the Bigfoot to know they had discovered his or her nest. The two men returned to the cabin to enjoy some eggnog and warm mince pies. They chose not to share their strange discovery with Phoebe and Francesca, believing it for the best not to say a word. If he had been spending Christmas in New York with his family, he would have never had the pleasure of meeting Wallace and his daughter Francesca, or being able to extend the generous loving arms of hospitality to two people who were not going to celebrate Christmas at all. It had felt exceedingly fulfilling to entertain two strangers in their cabin, a 7-year-old girl who had reconciled herself to the fact that this Christmas no presents were going to be forthcoming or to grace her Christmas stocking this year. The young girl had been surprised into having a fabulous day, along with Christmas presents she had never anticipated receiving. He was contemplating all this when he saw a dark, shadowy figure moving towards the cabin, stopping short in surprise to see Fletcher sitting on the steps smoking a cigar. Fletcher realized with astonishment it was a Bigfoot. Over his arms he carried half the carcass of the deer that he had previously killed the day before. For a moment he locked eyes with Fletcher. The Bigfoot was easily over 8 foot tall, 700 pounds, and definitely a young male. Fletcher was struck by how human his face was. The creature brought the deer carcass a foot away from where Fletcher was sitting on the step, putting it down cautiously on the ground. He nodded at Fletcher, pointing at the carcass and then back at him, implying that it was a gift. He then glided away, and as Fletcher watched him move, he looked as if he was floating on the snow. Fletcher had to pinch himself. Was he dreaming? No, he certainly was not. He was soon to realize the creature had gifted him back after they had left him a box of food on the tree. "My God, I've seen a Bigfoot," he thought, "close up and personal. How many people get to have a Christmas like this?" Fletcher took in another puff from his Cuban cigar, deciding that this indeed had turned out to be the best Christmas he'd ever had. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Happy Christmas to everyone. Goodbye and good night.